Good morning, everyone. My name is Ayo Akala. I'm a senior health specialist with the World Bank. I'm with the bank's Human Capital Project team. It's my pleasure to be here today. It's my first time at Switchpoint, and I've learned a lot so far. A lot of innovation, a lot of different ways to do things that we're not always familiar with at the bank. So please bear with me as I try to adjust to the context. I'm here to talk about the bank's project. We call it a project, but it's really not a project. It's the Human Capital Project, but it's really a global agenda to try and increase our investment and our focus on human beings, people. And this is really important because really people are at the center of everything that we do. All the data that we see, all the statistics that we see, all the pictures that we see, all the organizations that we talk to, at the end of the day, it's really the human beings that are at the center. And so the bank has been working with different partners and different countries on this agenda, on this global agenda. It's a global agenda, but it's also an agenda that starts right from the individual. It involves the community, the society, the whole of government, the whole of society, because we all have to be part of this process. We say that focusing on seems to be working there, but it's not. Okay, good. We say that focusing on human beings is the right thing to do, but it goes beyond being the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. Because we know that economic growth depends on both human capital, physical capital, and other sources of capital. You really need a good balance to be able to have economic growth and development of countries. And human capital really talks about the knowledge, the skills, and health that people accumulate over their lifetime that makes them more productive. The well-being of each individual is important for the productivity of the individual, the family, the society, and the country as a whole. And the added value is that human capital, if we have good investment in it and people are well given the opportunities to be more productive, they're able to better utilize physical capital that the governments put so much effort into putting into place in countries. So it's an added value that you not only build human capital, but you have better returns on your physical capital. And we also know that where human capital has received consistent attention over the years in many of these countries, they have really been doing well. And we have evidence of that from Singapore, Ireland, Finland, South Korea, and many other countries as well. So the bank started working on this issue a couple of years ago. We started with what we call the Wealth of Nations. It was a report that came out in 2018, and it was basically looking at the wealth of countries and to see what it consisted of. And as I indicated, it really consists of human capital, physical capital, natural capital, and other assets. And what we found was that 70% of the total wealth of the world is really is made up of human capital. But this really masks the average across countries, because if you will see from this graph, the high income countries, it really consists of 70%, right? But when you look lower down the line, you see that for lower income countries, it's as low as 40%. And so really it means that these countries are not really investing as much in their people as they can, and they're not really helping to contribute to the growth of their countries because they're not giving enough opportunities to their people. The other thing that we did in 2018 was the World Development Report that focused on the learning agenda. And we found that there's a poor learning outcomes. Children are in school, but they're really not coming out with the amount of learning, amount of basic skills that they need to be able to adapt to the jobs in the world. So we know that there's a learning crisis out there. And we know that the world is also changing. And in 2019, World Development Report was focused on the changing nature of work. So if the foundation is weak, it's really difficult for children, when they get out of school, to be able to adapt and be ready for the changing world of work. We know that the future of work is changing. Nobody's 100% sure of what that change would look like. But we do know that technology is going to be a big part of that. And if children are coming out of schools without the basic numeracy and literacy skills, it really already puts them at a disadvantage to be able to take advantage of the changing nature of work. So it really means that we still have a lot of work to do to invest in our children, in our people, to make sure that they're ready to come out of schools, ready to learn. And I found a positive quote that really puts all of this together. And it's really about how learning is so central and so important for the future of work. And the quote is from Jim Rohn, he's an American entrepreneur. And the quote says, "Learning is the beginning of wealth. Learning is the beginning of health. Learning is the beginning of spirituality. Searching and learning is where the miracle process all begins." And I really think this really encapsulates this. But we also have to take a step back to realize that we've made a lot of progress. As somebody said yesterday, we need to pat ourselves at the back for all the good work that we're doing, because we've seen that over the years, we've been able to reduce child stunting and child mortality. We've been able to bring down maternal mortality. We have rising life expectancies. We have more children in school. And we have more people that are disadvantaged that are covered by safety nets. So we know that it can be done, and we know that change is possible. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that there's so many more major challenges that we all have to tackle. We know that 1 in 10 children in sub-Saharan Africa do not even make it to their 5th birthday. We know that 22% of children under 5, which translates to 151 million children, are stunted because of chronic malnutrition, illnesses, and exposure to all sorts of stress. And this already is affecting their brain development. If your brain is already affected at such a young age, it means that learning becomes an issue for you, and the changes that you need in life to be able to be adaptable and to be able to be more tenacious, your brain is not even getting that chance. So we know that a lot more needs to be done. And that's the basis of the bank's Human Capital Project. It's really a global agenda to prioritize more and better investments in human capital so that we have greater equity and economic growth. And it really has 3 pillars: the Human Capital Index, the Measurement and Research Agenda, and the country engagement. The index itself is really a summary measure of human capital, and it's trying to answer the question of how much human capital can a child that is born today in a particular country expect to acquire by the age of 18, given the risks to poor health and poor education that prevail in the country where he or she lives. And it really looks at 3 components, their outcome components, that are really contributing to productivity of an individual and eventually to the productivity of the family, society, and the country. It looks at survival, how many of the children in that country will actually survive to the age of 5? How many of them will actually be able to get to school? And when they're in school, how many of them actually learn sufficiently enough to be able to be productive and engage as future workers? And then we look at the health as well. What is the contribution of health to this? How much stunting is a child in that country facing? And when the child goes through adolescence, how healthy is a child to be able to learn? And when the child is ready to go into a world of work, are they healthy enough? We know that NCDs are a big issue now, and they all have an effect on productivity. And so we put all this together to be able to assess the productivity of a future worker, which is what we call the Human Capital Index. And the index really calculates for a country on a scale of between 0 and 1. So if a country has an HCI, Human Capital Index, of 0.5, it really means that children in that country, by the time they get out of school, will only be half as productive as they would be. Now, this is very sad, not just for the individual and the family, but also for the society and the country as a whole. And if we look at this really just shows a summary of the world in terms of the different regions of the world. On average, for the globe, we find that 56% of children of the world live in countries that have an HCI of less than 0.5. So basically, half the productivity of a future worker. And when we look at this also, we also see that there are certain regions that really need a lot of attention. Of course, Africa is there with an average of 0.4. And then we have MENA, 0.49, and South Asia, which is 0.46. So we know that we need a lot of work on this agenda. And the important thing to note is that there's no country that is at an HCI of 1. The highest that we have is Singapore at 0.8, and the lowest is Chad at 0.29. And it really just tells you that there's a wide range, even with these averages that we see here. We also know that the HCI is positively correlated. It's correlated to poverty as well as to high fertility rates. We've talked a lot about high population in the Africa region. We have the League of 157 countries that we were able to calculate a human capital index for, 157. Because of the data limitations, we don't have it for all the countries. But out of the 157, the 30 countries in the bottom of the list are mostly African countries, and majority of them have total fertility rates of more than 4, which is really high. The second pillar is the measurement and research agenda. And it's really us acknowledging the fact that, yes, we've put together this HCI, this index, but it's not comprehensive enough to be able to fully capture human capital accumulation process. We need much more information, and there's data limitations that's out there. So we really need to look at more at what are the drivers of human capital accumulation, and really how do we focus on that. And so this pillar really looks at providing policymakers and individual citizens the information on how to more effectively invest in their own human capital, so that there's a better well-being and productivity for each one. It's also concerning how we understand the human capital accumulation process much better and how to measure this. I should also say that the Human Capital Index is really looking at the future productivity, but then there are also the stock of people already at work right now. They also have a human capital that we need to assess and see how we can increase it to make sure that they're as productive as they could be. So the HCI is not comprehensive. There are other sources of data that you need to put together to be able to assess a country's human capital index and how that is important for the country. The third pillar is the country engagement. And this is really about supporting countries as they design and implement policies and priorities for accelerated human capital development. We know that the commitment is there. When we started in October 2018, last year, when the index was launched, we had 28 countries that committed to joining the program. Now we have over 61, as indicated here, and it really spans a whole host of countries. I just quickly want to turn to health and human capital, and we know that, of course, health is a basic right. It has intrinsic value, but we also know that healthier people accumulate more human capital, and we also know that healthier populations drive economy. So health is a critical aspect of the human capital accumulation process. And we know that this is important because worker productivity is affected by their health, the learning and cognitive and reasoning ability. We know that the labor market participation is affected by the health of people, whether it's skilled or unskilled workers. We know that healthy people have better savings and they're able to better invest in their human capital process. And we know that fertility and population issues are critical. There's also the issue of making sure that we intervene across the life cycle, right from conception. And we know that investing at this early stage is the most beneficial. The returns are much, much better, are much higher. Although you don't see the returns until much later, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be investing at that stage. But it also means that it doesn't stop at the early childhood development stage. We need to go right across to adolescence, adulthood, as well as old age. Quality is really very important, and as this slide shows, even when we are able to achieve access, if the quality of the services that we're providing is not sufficient, we're not really making a dent in this. In this, we see that for many of these countries, they have already achieved up to 90% of skilled birth attendance coverage. But you see that in terms of the neonatal mortality, it varies. And it's because these women are actually getting to the hospitals, but the quality of care that they're receiving is not actually being beneficial. And I just wanted to indicate the importance of an integrated strategies for what we're trying to do. It's a very complex task. We need to look at the interventions. The UHC was spoken about earlier on today. We need multi-sectoral action. It's not just the human development sector, health, education, and social protection. We need beyond that water and sanitation, transportation, governance, All of these are so important, and we need the health system to be improved. And all of this needs to be based on global evidence. It needs to be evidence-based. We need to focus on the drivers of poor performance at each country level. We need to use a whole of government, a whole of society approach. Like I said, it's not just one sector. It's not just the government, it's the private sector, other individuals, other agencies that need to help. And we need to scale up those interventions that we know that are making a difference. And in this way, we can improve the indicators that are contributing to healthy populations and to ensure that people are meeting their full potentials. So opportunities for going forward need to sharpen financing. It's not just increasing financing, but also making sure that the financing that we have, we're using it more efficiently. We need to invest early, like I said. We need to tackle quality. Quality should not be relegated to the back. Yes, we don't want to wait until we can achieve excellence, but we need to be sure that there's sufficiency in the quality that we're providing. We need to embrace innovation. There's a lot of innovation going on, but we also need to remember that technology also has unintended consequences that we need to pay attention to. We need to bolster demand. We need to make sure that individuals are empowered to request quality services of their providers and the government, and we need to align health, education, and other sectors. So I'd like to conclude, I'm sorry I've taken too much time, to say that this is really a global agenda. It's something that doesn't end. You don't stop investing in human capital, neither as an individual or as a society. It's something that keeps going on. And we need to make sure that we engage the different stakeholders that are important for this. It's not just an individual, it takes a community. Somebody said earlier today, it really takes a village. We're in a village right now. It really does take a village to ensure that we reach human capital. And the other important thing is that everybody has a human capital story. We all have opportunities. We're all here. We're benefiting because our parents gave us the opportunities. We took advantage of the opportunities. We live in a society where there are opportunities for us to take. So as we go out into the world, let's share our human capital stories, but also remember that human beings are central to it. Let's look for opportunities in our jobs, but also in our private lives to be able to make sure that we're contributing to the human capital of the world. I have 2 kids. Those are my private human capital projects that I'm focusing on. We all have our own private human capital projects that we're focusing on. It really takes a village. Thank you.